Hello and welcome to The Human Curious. If you love exploring the mysteries of our world, you're in the right place. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe, share, and like this video to support The Human Curious. Our world is built upon stories, the bedrock of culture. We are told tales of gods, monsters, and heroes. We call them myths, legends, or fables. We confidently label them as primitive attempts to explain the world. But what if this is wrong? What if our modern interpretation has missed the point? What if these stories are not simple explanations but something far more vital? Imagine they are a complex delivery system designed to survive the fall of empires and the erosion of time. What if every myth is actually a warning, a final, desperate communication? What if the tales we dismiss as fantasy are the most important legacy our distant past has left us? They were encrypting a message, a warning about dangers so profound that they could only be preserved in myth. To explore this idea, we must first look at the stories themselves. We must peel back the layers of interpretation that centuries of scholarship have placed upon them. Look at the pantheon of Greek gods, not as whimsical beings, but as personifications of immense, often destructive natural forces. Think of the monsters that haunt our oldest tales. Could the fire-breathing dragon be a symbolic representation of a comet streaking across the sky? The theme of a great flood is one of the most persistent myths in human history. Are these echoes of a single, shared, traumatic event? Perhaps they are the fragmented memories of a genuine global cataclysm passed down through generations. The details may change, but the core of the story remains the same. The waters rose, civilization was destroyed, and only a handful of survivors were left to begin again. They become data points, eyewitness accounts of a catastrophe that shaped the future of our species, encoded in a truly unforgettable story. If myths are coded warnings, who sent the message? Who were the authors of these alarms? This question opens a door pushing the boundaries of our accepted history. One theory suggests a precursor civilization, a technologically advanced society that fell long ago. In their final moments, the last survivors sought to leave a legacy of their mistakes. They encoded warnings into allegorical tales, the remnants of a forgotten science. The Tower of Babel, gods warring in the heavens, might be distorted accounts of devastating wars. Myths are a faint signal from a civilization that paid the ultimate price for its knowledge. Or are these messages bubbling up from the very core of our own minds, from the collective unconscious? These ancient warnings are from ourselves, warning us against repeating our most ancient and self-destructive patterns. Who could have sent these warnings? The most tantalizing possibility points to a forgotten chapter of human history. A precursor civilization, Atlantis, Lemuria, Mu. What if a technologically advanced civilization thrived thousands of years before us? Something went terribly wrong. In their final days, the last survivors had to warn the future. They created stories and myths, encoding warnings into narratives designed to be passed down. The myth of Atlantis becomes a potential blueprint, a warning from the ghost of a lost world. What if the source is buried deep inside each and every one of us? This leads us to Carl Jung and the collective unconscious, a layer shared by all humanity, passed down through our DNA. It is a vast reservoir of shared memories, instincts, and universal symbols accumulated over millions of years. Jung called these universal symbols archetypes: the hero, the great mother, the shadow, and the monster. They are warnings generated by our own shared ancient mind. The Great Flood myth might be an archetypal memory, a deep primal fear of overwhelming chaos. Myths from disconnected cultures share similarities because they draw from the same deep well of human experience. They are the psychic echoes of our species' deepest traumas and anxieties. There is a third possibility, one that combines the other two. Perhaps the source of the warning is both external and internal. Consider this: a precursor civilization did exist, and it did face a world-ending catastrophe. The survivors, few in number and scattered, did not have the means to rebuild their advanced society. They found themselves living among more primitive early human tribes. They could not explain their advanced physics or their complex history in literal terms. So they did the only thing they could. They created powerful stories, myths designed to be understood on an archetypal level. These stories were the perfect message in a bottle. They were designed to resonate with the deep structures of the human mind, the collective unconscious. The story of a great flood would tap into that primal archetypal fear of water and chaos. The story of a war between gods using fiery weapons would trigger the archetypal fear of overwhelming destructive power. The precursor survivors essentially hacked the human psyche. They used the language of archetypes, the very language of dreams and deep memory, to ensure their warning would never be forgotten, even after its literal origins were lost. This explains why the myths feel both historical and deeply personal. They carry the weight of a real, forgotten event, but they speak to us in the symbolic language of our own souls. The warnings were planted like seeds into the fertile ground of our collective imagination. Over thousands of years, these seeds grew. They were nurtured by storytellers, priests, and shamans. Each culture gave them a unique form, clothing the core message in their own specific gods, heroes, and monsters. But the essential warning, the original genetic code of the message, remained intact within the story's structure. Therefore, the source is a synthesis. It is a message from a lost past, delivered through the timeless medium of our own shared consciousness. The people of Atlantis, or a similar civilization, may be the original authors. But the collective unconscious is the library that has preserved their work for millennia. This makes the warnings even more potent. They are not just a historical curiosity or a psychological quirk. They are a living legacy, a final communication from our ancestors, carried across the ocean of time by the currents of our own deepest nature, waiting for a generation with the wisdom to finally understand. Let's examine the most common mythic warnings. Cataclysmic natural disasters. These tales speak of the earth turning against humanity. They aren't just bad weather stories, but narratives of annihilation at nature's hands. These myths encode a fundamental warning. Respect the raw, untamable power of our planet. When gods are angry, the world becomes their weapon, reminding us civilization is fragile. Myths warn that our confidence in managing the environment is a dangerous illusion. Gods of earthquakes, volcanoes, storms, and floods populate pantheons, personifying destructive power. These myths are a coded language for geology and meteorology, epic poetry of survival. The core message is humility. We are inhabitants, not masters, subject to nature's cycles. These stories are a library of disasters, urging us to respect nature's power and our place within it. Let's open our first case file, the universal myth of a great flood. This is powerful evidence for myths as coded warnings. From Noah in the Bible, to Utnapishtim in the Epic of Gilgamesh, to Manu in Hindu lore, and Deucalion in Greek myth, the narrative is shockingly consistent. A divine power, displeased with humanity, decides to cleanse the world with a catastrophic deluge. A righteous man is warned to build a vessel, saving pairs of creatures and his family. These stories are fragmented memories of a real global event. At the end of the last ice age, the world experienced rapid sea level rise. For coastal populations, it would have been a world-ending apocalypse. The myth of the Great Flood is a preserved traumatic memory, a warning about climate shifts and rising seas. As we face climate change, the Great Flood myth becomes a survival guide. The second major category of coded warnings shifts its focus from the fury of nature to the folly of humanity. These are the myths that caution against the dangers of our own creations, specifically the peril of technological advancement without corresponding wisdom and humility. These stories explore a recurring theme. Humanity, in its brilliance and ambition, creates something magnificent that ultimately leads to its own downfall. It's a sophisticated warning about the double-edged sword of progress, a timeless alert that our greatest strengths can become our most fatal weaknesses if we're not careful. In these narratives, the danger isn't an external force like a volcano or a flood. The danger comes from within, born from our own minds and built by our own hands. These myths act as a mirror, reflecting our own potential for self-destruction. They suggest that civilizations don't just fall, they're often pushed. They're pushed by their own unchecked ambition, their thirst for power, and their belief that they can conquer the fundamental laws of the universe. The gods in these stories often act not out of random malice but as a correcting force, restoring balance when humanity's pride threatens to unmake the world. This type of warning is profoundly psychological. It speaks to the concept of hubris, the ancient Greek idea of dangerous overconfidence and arrogance. The myths serve as allegorical case studies of this concept in action. They demonstrate through dramatic and memorable stories the inevitable consequence of thinking we can become gods. The punishment that follows isn't just divine retribution, it's often a direct, logical outcome of the initial transgression. The technology fails, the creation turns on its creator, or the ambition leads to a societal collapse. It's a warning about cause and effect on a civilizational scale. Crucially, these myths aren't anti-technology or anti-progress, they're far more nuanced. They're a plea for balance. They advocate for wisdom, foresight, and ethical consideration to be woven into the fabric of our innovations. They warn that knowledge without humility is poison. This second warning is a message from our ancestors, or perhaps from a forgotten precursor civilization, who may have learned this lesson the hard way. They're telling us to be careful what we build, for our most impressive achievements might contain the very seeds of our own destruction. Let's open our second case file, focusing on two potent myths about technological hubris: the Tower of Babel and the story of Icarus. In Babel, humanity unites to build a tower to heaven, an act of arrogance. Their language is confounded, cooperation shattered, and they're scattered. This warns of the fragility of centralized systems. Icarus, with wings of feathers and wax, is warned not to fly too high. Ignoring this, he soars too close to the sun. The wax melts and he plummets to his death. This allegory warns of technology's dangers. A tool is only as safe as its user's wisdom. Quick icebreaker: what's your favorite myth or legend? Let us know in the comments below. The final category of warnings is the most strange and unsettling. These myths speak of existential and cosmic threats, battles with incomprehensible monsters from the sea, sky, or other dimensions. What if these are warnings about threats outside our understanding? Could these be coded warnings about dangers not of this earth? What if these myths warn us against practices that could tear a hole between worlds? They caution against the belief that humanity can know everything. Some doors are best left unopened, some sleeping gods undisturbed. Our greatest threat may come from the silent, watching darkness between the stars. For our final case file, let's examine the cosmic threat embodied by the world serpent. In Norse mythology, Jormungandr is a sea serpent encircling the world. Its release triggers Ragnarok, the end of the world. Similarly, Apep in Egyptian myth threatens the sun god Ra. These aren't just big snakes, they are reality-defining threats. Now consider the abstract horrors of Lovecraft, who wrote of cosmic entities like Cthulhu. Their awakening spells doom for humanity. What if these horrors are a modern interpretation of an ancient warning? A coded warning about existential threats we are not equipped to handle. These myths are the ultimate here be dragons on the map of reality. A final plea to leave the universe's greatest mysteries alone. When we examine the three categories of warnings, natural, technological, and existential, a clear pattern emerges. These myths aren't random tales. They're a survival guide, passed down through generations. Each myth addresses a critical threat at a different stage of civilization. First, nature floods, earthquakes, volcanoes, stories that teach respect for the environment and our place within it. Without learning these lessons, no society survives long enough to face greater dangers. Next, technological warnings: Icarus, Babel, Atlantis. Cautionary tales about unchecked ambition and hubris. These myths warn that our own creations can destroy us if we lack foresight. Many civilizations may fail at this stage, undone by their own inventions. Finally, existential threats, cosmic horrors, and alien gods. Reminders that even advanced societies face dangers beyond their understanding. These are lessons in humility, warning us of limits on a cosmic scale. Mythology, when decoded, is a multi-layered data system guiding us through the perils of evolution. It's a curriculum for survival, written in the language of symbols. The myths are not just stories, they are instructions for making it through the great filter. To unlock the warnings in ancient myths, we must master their true language symbolism. Literal facts fade, but symbols endure, speaking to every culture and era. Myths use archetypes and metaphors to encode vital information, ensuring survival messages persist. When we read myths as symbolic code, their hidden meanings emerge. The stories are Trojan horses carrying essential data through time. The creators knew that emotions, fear, hope, awe, would always be understood. Myths aren't simple ciphers, they're complex poems rich with layered meaning. A god is not a literal being but a symbol for a force of nature or a human truth. The god of war is conflict itself, the god of the sea is the ocean's power. Understanding this framework shifts our focus from historical fact to timeless truth. Myths are not failed science, they're successful data compression. They distill warnings about geology, society, and risk into unforgettable narratives. To decode them, we must read the language of symbols. The key to survival is learning to interpret these ancient codes. One of the most powerful mythic symbols is the monster. Every culture's legends are filled with dragons, serpents, and chimeras, ultimate threats to humanity. But monsters aren't failed biology. They're metaphors for disaster. The dragon, for example, is a code for catastrophe. In Europe, a volcanic eruption. In Asia, a flood or typhoon. The monster is a mask for cataclysm, adaptable to new threats as they arise. A dragon could also represent plague, comet, or even advanced weaponry. The hero who slays the monster symbolizes humanity's ingenuity and courage in the face of disaster. Composite beasts like the chimera represent complex, multifaceted crises, political chaos, famine, plague. These creatures are not literal, they're symbolic infographics, unforgettable warnings. The monster's true purpose is to personify existential threats. Myths use these symbols to teach us how to recognize and confront disaster. The language of monsters is the language of survival. Decoding them reveals the dangers we must overcome. Just as monsters symbolize threats, the gods in myths represent fundamental forces and principles. They're not just supernatural beings, they're personifications of nature, society, and human behavior. Every pantheon features a sky god, sea god, war god, and more, each a symbol for a core reality. Zeus is the unpredictable sky, Poseidon the untamable sea. Angering a god is a metaphor for triggering disaster, like a tsunami or storm. Myths of hubris like Babel or Atlantis show natural laws reasserting themselves when humans overreach. The gods are consequences, not characters, reminders that every action has a reaction. Some gods may even be distorted memories of advanced ancestors, their knowledge mythologized over time. These figures became both the authors and the symbols of the warnings. The pantheon is a model of the universe and the psyche encoded in story. Understanding the gods as principles transforms myth into a guide for survival. The gods are the rules of the world given a human face. They warn us of the boundaries we must respect. If myths are a library of warnings, their true value is in guiding us now. The dangers they describe are more relevant than ever. The myth of Prometheus, who gave fire to humanity, is a warning about revolutionary technology. Today, AI is our modern fire, powerful, transformative, but fraught with risk. The myth asks, what price will we pay for this gift? Are we unleashing something we can't control? The story urges us to consider consequences before we're chained to our own creation. The Tower of Babel warns of the fragility of global unity. Our digital world is a new Babel. Unprecedented connection, but also vulnerability. The myth cautions that systemic collapse could shatter civilization. These ancient stories are not relics. They're blueprints for navigating today's risks. The warnings are activating all around us. Myths speak directly to the challenges of the 21st century. Their relevance has never been greater. Nature's warnings echo in our headlines: floods, droughts, fire from the sky. The Great Flood myth is a warning about rapid, world-altering climate change. Today, rising seas and melting ice caps are the real-world consequences. The anger of the gods is a metaphor for the laws of physics. We are Icarus, flying high on the wings of fossil fuels. Our prosperity has brought us to the brink. The myth warns, fly too close to the sun, and you fall. Icarus is a precise allegory for our climate crisis. The very engine of our success could cause our downfall. Dragons and monsters also have modern forms, thermonuclear weapons, disasters of our own making. The dragon is now a missile, a constant threat in our world. Myths warn that civilization can be destroyed by nature, technology, or cosmic forces. Today we face all three dangers at once. The messages from the past have converged on our present. The myths are no longer just stories, they are a diagnosis of our time. We stand at a crossroads with echoes of the past. For centuries we've seen mythology as quaint artifacts, irrelevant to our modern age. But this is dangerous hubris. What if myths were meant to be heeded, not believed? A library of generational trauma, lessons from forgotten catastrophes, voices of those who saw the seas rise, creations turn to dust. A warning encoded in unforgettable stories. The patterns are there, a gift from our ancestors. The question isn't if the myths were real, but if we're wise enough to understand their warnings. They provide context, data, dire predictions, and a map of potential failures. The rest is up to us. The myths hold up a mirror, the choice is ours. Recognize them as the most important message we've ever received. Decode the warnings and change our course. If you enjoyed this journey, please subscribe, share, and comment your thoughts below. Stay curious with the human curious.